final set of notes for biology, section 1.4, part 2. So in the last notes we talked about making GMOs, genetically modified organisms. In this one we're going to look at what they're actually used for. So why you would want to create some of these things and what some of the benefits might be, and also kind of what some of the potential risks associated with it might be. So GMOs have been around since basically the 1980s in what we currently think of as GMOs. The technology has been used to make copies of genes or proteins. So one of the sort of first examples of this was in 1982, a company called Genentech modified bacteria to produce insulin for human use. So anyone that is an insulin-dependent diabetic, insulin reduces high sugar levels in the blood. Normally your pancreas produces it. If you're diabetic, your pancreas doesn't do a good job of creating insulin, so then you inject insulin. The insulin that is mass-produced is naturally made, but instead of being made by a human pancreas, it's made by bacteria that have that gene inserted in them. And so that's, say, one of the first sort of widespread uses of GMOs. So we have a human cell, you isolate the insulin gene, you take a bacterial plasmid and you insert that insulin gene into the plasmid. Then you end up with your transgenic bacteria, which grows in culture. Bacteria reproduce like crazy, and then from that you can extract the insulin. So as those bacteria grow, they're just making more and more and more insulin, and then you're able to extract that and then use it for pharmaceutical use. GMOs have also been used to help determine just gene function, so actually determining what genes are used for. So the way they usually do this is they use something called the knockout mouse, where they break genes in it in order to study the function of the gene. So if the gene is broken, if it can't perform its function, you can see what function is lacking in the adult mouse. So you take your wild type mouse, and then you figure out what your gene of interest is, and a functional gene would do whatever. So like, I don't know, fur color, number of toes, whatever it is. And then you knock that gene out. And so then when that gene is then no longer being expressed properly. So this might be the gene to create fur on this mouse. And then this one maybe doesn't have any fur because that gene has been knocked out. And that's how you can sort of tell what the gene does. Because if it doesn't work, it doesn't do it anymore. Third potential use for GMOs is studying gene expression patterns that exist by modifying genes to see how the expression changes through the entirety of an organism's life or in different organs or regions of the organism. So mutating a plant gene so that it's amplified, so there's more of it, or it's more prominent, and then measuring its expression effect during the many stages of that plant. So being able to see as the plant progresses, how much that gene is actually being amplified in different stages. So obviously, like in humans, if you want to think about like growth hormones, more important as a child or as a baby in order to get bigger than it is as an adult. So you would see that gene expression sort of tapering off, but this allows us to get sort of more information about different organisms and when different genes are actually being expressed. We can use GMOs for actually just creating models for human traits and the genes. So you can modify mouse genes so that they're identical or similar to human genes to determine what the human genes do. So you can't create a knockout human where you're knocking out genes to see what happens, but so you can basically modify mouse genes so that you can then end up figuring out, okay, this code in a human, what does it do? Okay, let's take this code, insert it into a mouse, figure out what it does, and then we can go back and report on that for humans. Okay. And the sort of last common use of GMOs is to generate modified food sources, both plant and animal. So one of the examples of this is Bt-resistant corn. So Bt-resistant corn is a genetically engineered plant that produces an insect toxin that's called cryprotein, which is short for crystal-like protein. The BT gene comes from a bacteria called Bacillus thuringiensis, and it produces a toxin that disrupts the gut function in the larvae or caterpillars of insects that are considered to be crop pests. So it's a bacteria that basically normally produces a toxin that would make it so that larval stages, which is in the case of like a butterfly would be a caterpillar, they can't digest food properly. And so this is taking ones that would be crop pests. So for example, things that would be eating corn and putting that toxin into the leaves of the corn so that those larvae can't eat it, basically. Okay, so you isolate your gene out of your bacterium, you insert it into your crop, and then a pest will die basically when eating on any of the plant parts, which means that you end up with not having that insect destroying that crop. Another example of this was golden rice. So in 2000, which is obviously 21 years ago now almost, depending on what time of the year it was, researchers in Switzerland developed a genetically modified strain of rice that's known as golden rice. It's known as golden rice because it's yellow, it's golden. It has increased iron and vitamin A content compared to regular rice. It's designed to basically help reduce malnutrition in poorer parts of the world. So the thought is rice is easy to grow. If you can get more nutrients from rice, then you can have people being fed sort of easier. So golden rice actually has 4 different foreign genes. So it's got its own chromosome, and then it's got ferritin to increase the iron content of it, and then it has an enzyme that makes it easier to absorb the iron, and then it has a protein that makes it easier to increase your iron uptake. So you're putting iron in there, you are getting rid of something that makes it hard to absorb iron, and then you're adding something that makes it easier to absorb iron. And then you also have genes for beta-carotene, which is a precursor for vitamin A, being made so that you can increase your vitamin A intake as well. Okay, a bunch of different genetic traits that have been expressed in GMOs in the States. Apples, okay, so they've been altered so that they don't brown as easily. Because when you cut open an apple, if it's in the air, it starts to turn brown pretty quickly. So they've been genetically modified so they can stay cut for longer without turning brown. There's nothing wrong with it turning brown, it's just not pretty. Potato, so they've been altered so that they reduce bruising and black spot. Once again, non-browning. A couple of them have blight resistance, so once again, like more likely to have a good crop. Field corn is insect resistance. We talked about that already. Herbicide tolerance, so that you can spray herbicides, basically killing off weeds in the area without worrying about killing off your corn. Drought tolerance, so if it gets dry, they don't die off as much. Various uses of it. Canola, herbicide tolerance, once again, so you can spray herbicide, so things to kill off weeds. Alfalfa, herbicide tolerance again. Soybean, insect resistance and herbicide tolerance. Notice a trend here yet. Papaya, disease resistance. Anyways, so usually it's basically just ways to make it so that the crop will either thrive, so that it's easier to maintain the crop, or make it so that the product will last better once it's no longer part of the plant. Okay. Another example is transgenic goat that makes human growth hormone in milk. So goat milk is an absolutely fine source of calcium and protein and stuff for humans. But goats have been genetically modified to make the human growth hormone in their milk. So the hormone is used to treat humans who have non-functioning gene and without treatment would have a shorter stature. Shorter stature means you're significantly shorter than average. So like more than 2 standard deviations below average. This isn't like a little short, and this is quite short, and not just because like your parents are short and your genetics play into it. And so it's individuals that, if they have a non-functioning gene for human growth hormone, and that's been identified as the sort of deficit for the individual, then you can have their diet supplemented with goat milk that has human growth hormone in it. Okay. Or transgenic pigs that are more compatible with human tissue. So pig tissue is pretty compatible with human tissue anyways, but basically making it so that you can have pigs growing human organs or very close to human organs to then be used as transplant. So this is giving an example of like a human pancreas being created in a pig and then being able to donate that pancreas to a human. So pancreas is something that each human only has one of. Therefore, you can't donate, you can't do live donation of your pancreas. It's something that doesn't survive terribly well post-mortem. And so, yeah, just giving sort of more options for organ donation, not necessarily having to come from humans. Okay, so advantages and disadvantages of GMOs. So I'm gonna let you do this. Put a check mark beside the ones you think are advantageous and an X beside the ones that you think are disadvantageous. If there are ones you're not sure about, message me, okay? Some of them might seem advantageous to some people and disadvantageous to others, and that doesn't mean that it's like right or wrong. Some of these have more obvious answers than others. That's the ones that you think are potentially a good thing and the ones that you think are potentially a bad thing. Okay. And more of them. You've got them all in your notes. We're on page 81 right now. Okay, so when we talk about GMOs, we're usually talking about ones done through technology. So this like cutting out and stitching in genes. Genetically modifying food, though, has been happening since the beginning of agriculture. So we're looking at over 12,000 years ago now, but it was previously done through something called selective breeding, okay? Where we breed our animals or our plants or whatever in order to make them more likely to have the traits that we want. Okay? Modern technology basically just speeds up this process. Most scientists agree that GMO foods are safe. Okay, but that doesn't mean go ahead and modify absolutely everything. So it doesn't mean the technology automatically should just be approved no matter what. Genetically modified crops have been planted extensively for a little over a decade now. As of now, there are no negative health consequences that have been detected, and none are actually anticipated. They're not expecting to find something going wrong. But the overall relative newness of genetically modified crops requires that we continue to monitor for health impacts.